Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here with us today on day 3 at RESO Remote. We're excited to have a couple people here for our pain point sessions we just started this year. We have TJ Bolan, who is Expansion and MLS Compliance Manager for Redfin. How you doing, TJ?
I'm great. How you doing today, Sam?
Doing great. Thank you. And we have Scott Petronis, owner of Eccentric Consulting, longtime brokerage technology partner with us. How are you, Scott?
Awesome. How are you, Sam?
Doing great, thanks. Excited to have both of you here. So the point of our Pain Points Forum is a lot of issues that people have in the industry are not always inside the box of what a certain work group might be working on. We may have things that are creating issues for brokers, for agents, for MLSs, or even consumer technology that really needs smart people like you to focus on and see if maybe there are some solutions out there, and let us document those and do some real research and development at RESO for that. So we know in this kind of environment right now, we don't want to have a negative tone. We're not looking to criticize companies or systems which don't fit all of our needs. We're really trying to document and be able to start analyzing and discussing maybe ways we can make improvements to our systems with all of our technology partners. So after our speakers introduce some topics to be talked about today, we'll move into an interactive forum where you as attendees can ask questions, can interact, and we can really try to discuss this in as in-person way as we can possibly do in this sort of a setting. So we'll just get started here, and I'll start with you, TJ.
Sure.
A lot of what we talk about is technology, but there's also a communication side as to whether it's policy, whether it's changes, whatever's happening in our industry. It may get locked up in certain silos. So you've had some issues or some concerns about how we make sure everybody's fully informed in communications around our data and technology.
Definitely. We're active in over 80 markets across the US and Canada. And for us, maintaining all of those data feeds requires a great deal of communication with all of the MLSs that we're members of, as well as all the technology vendors. And one thing that's been a huge pain point for us are those communications, specifically when MLS rules and policy change. We don't always receive those communications because on the MLS's side, we're a vendor, but on the MLS's side, we're also a brokerage. So we toe that line a little bit. And as a result, a lot of those communications either go to our broker or they get lost in the mix somewhere. So we find ourselves playing catch up quite a bit. In addition, the people that we typically need to work with to fix a lot of those issues, whether it's coming into compliance with a rule or actually fixing an issue on the website, are often getting in touch with the technical contact or technical lead, either at the MLS or at the vendor level. And getting in touch with those folks is often kind of a difficult task. I know some MLSs do have 1 or 2 folks that are able to take that role, but others don't. If you run a really small MLS, you're not going to have the bandwidth to hire on somebody that only focuses on tech issues or data feeds. So what we've done in the past to help fix that issue is we've opened up some online communication networks, specifically in Slack, which has been hugely successful. I know with everything going on nationwide right now, we're all using as many online chat features, tools, video conferencing like we're doing now, and that has been a huge help. So like our stance on that is as many people as we can get to chat through these issues online, from our engineers to your tech folks, I think is the best way to kind of go about some of those issues.
And I think that really ties in with something that CMLS and RESO had worked on as well, as getting data access information out, making sure that those communication lines are open, but also well advertised to the community. So
definitely,
the technology company can find which person they're supposed to be looking for. Can you give us a sort of a specific example of what kind of a change might happen and how that might break something downstream for a technology company?
Definitely. When NAR changed the sold data policy a few years ago, it was a pretty big deal because a lot of MLSs, instead of sending 3 years of sold listings out in the data feeds, we're going to be changing that to allow sold data to flow in the IDX feed back to January 1st of 2012. And for some MLSs, that might be several hundred listings. For others, it might be several 100,000 listings. And us running that backfill of the data takes quite some time to be able to do that. And some MLSs didn't adopt the policy in that kind of time frame. Others started sending them immediately. And so for us, it winds up slowing down server time. We're kind of overloading our servers, or the queries, running into query limit issues as well for some of those. So that, I mean, that's kind of one specific example from a few years ago, but it's definitely going to help us quite a bit if we get those communications well in advance so that we can plan those out strategically around other projects.
Yeah, that's a big issue coming from the Seattle skyline there and now over to Scott's Tavern on the other side.
You like that?
You run into these same sort of issues, Scott?
Yeah, I'd love to maybe chime in on this. A couple things come to mind here, and I couldn't agree more on the fact that like there are constantly changes, right? Especially if you're in a significant number of MLSs, right? Change is going to be inevitable. I've had to deal with somewhere in the neighborhood of 400 to 450 MLSs over the years at certain companies, and having to deal with that many markets. The one constant is change, right? You're just, there are always, whether it's field level changes, whether it's in some cases swapping vendors, right? You get a lot of communication about that stuff, but then the moment that it happens, oh man, what, I completely forgot, or boy, we forgot that last line of communication. There are compliance issues that come up on a almost daily basis when you've got tens of thousands of websites that are out there for your agents and those sorts of things that eventually funnel in. And you've got all kinds of as new RESO data dictionaries go out, right? These fields change and all of that. So when I think about that, I love the thought, TJ, of Slack works amazingly, right? When we're internal, you got teams all over the place, all over the world. Sometimes you're constantly communicating about these things, and people can actually have those kind of one-on-one dialogues, or you can have channels associated with this stuff. So it would be amazing, if we could think as a RESO community, are there some channels we could set up to make it easier for the participants to kind of create that line of communication.
It's a fantastic idea.
Yeah, and imagine today, right? And by the way, with Zoom, like how many times has Zoom gone down in the past couple of weeks, being overloaded with stuff, right? Yep. But the good news is,
we're all crossing our fingers right now.
Right now, let's hope it stays. But think, they've got a site, right, where you can go and look at, is it out in this area or whatever. Google has the same sorts of things where they're telling you, you can just, that there's a place to go for that sort of feedback. I think as this community starts to think about some of this stuff, maybe there are some ideas that we could tease out as part of the standards community of, maybe we start setting some standards for monitoring and, being able to provide that level of, not just uptime, but hey, we just made this change and this is what it affected. It affected this many records across this many, areas in the MLS, whatever it might be. But also even ideas about, over the years, have built a lot of APIs, and, always within those APIs, we provide, a feedback mechanism, right? So now imagine I could interrogate as a part of the API standard. Maybe we've got something in there that we standardize some of that level of communication and come up with some ideas of how do we encapsulate some of these constant types of changes that occur, and could we define some attributes around those things to be able to say, I could actually hit the API and pull back some of this stuff and get that information to say, oh, by the way, you're now going to have access, in 7 days, you're going to have access to 300,000 new records that you didn't have access to previously. And it just might be a softball going through a garden hose. So, you can prepare for those things.
Yeah, that really is sort of, the future, I think, of, what we'd like to be able to do at RESO. Obviously, there's lots of business decisions made in individual markets, but Scott will know this well because you've been a leader with our transport work group, and that the future of our certification is being more informative. And if that includes things like, just contact information for technical representatives at an MLS, data availability reports, if we've got just the actual data model of an organization, if you were to know that before you went to get data access, vendors could build tools right away that would just work. They'd fire up in seconds. And there's no secret sauce in a data model. It's just a data relationship model. So I think there's a lot more that we can do with that. I think you'll see as we're releasing this during the conference here this week, our certification map that will give you much more information about what level an individual organization is certified at and what that data might look like. And we can continue to expand upon that the more useful it is. But you're right, TJ, this is also something that local markets are going to have to really emphasize and find their own ways to advertise that and make it easy for members. So let's kind of break it down to the real basics right now, Scott. You had talked about just something as simple as forms and some areas where we could make some improvements there.
Yeah, and one of the things up front on the brokerage side of things, right? So much starts at that level, right? At that local level, getting the right forms. Ideally, those forms are digital, and you've now got them into a format where you can, very easily either create a new listing or start a listing agreement, and go from a listing agreement to starting a listing. There's your sales agreement. There's all of the other forms involved at that local level, not to mention the various, additions that brokerages want to add into that mix. One thing that I've noticed more so lately, as I've, had a little bit of time to ponder and think about things with a little extra time on my hands and a couple bottles of whiskey behind me, is, as I'm working with more and more brokerages and thinking about kind of the way that they tend to think about forms, it's constantly this model and mindset of, I need to get information into this form, and then information from this form into this database somewhere, and then from that database potentially somewhere out into yet another form. And it's a lot of this stuff that goes from analog to digital to then potentially analog again. And so, some of the things that I've been thinking of and talking with folks about is, how could we, for one, as a standards body, right? We can't standardize the forms around the country. We all know that. But as a standards body, potentially, are there ways that we could start thinking about that as a set of content that in individual markets, that form is no different than the data dictionary, right? It's now a dictionary of fields and attributes required for contracts and other things. The second part of it is, as opposed to the way that we tend to think about these things, right? Because all this stuff came from paper, right? At the end of the day, these things were paper forms that were in triplicate that, for folks that don't remember carbon copies and all the other wonderful stuff. But that's where this whole notion came from of this, I'm like literally filling something out and then somebody's taking that and keying it in. What if we were to start thinking about that more from a digital perspective, and not as it goes from analog to digital, but now it goes from literally input fields that can be mapped to some sort of dictionary that could then be, enable and facilitate other business processes. Because again, it really all starts with that input, right? That data entry into some sort of form that then goes to some database somewhere, or in some cases it goes to somebody's desk and then they're hand keying this stuff. And we know everybody's great at data entry and everybody loves to be perfect about it. But if we start thinking about this stuff from more of the starting from digital entry, digital input, standardization of those fields, then more and more organizations could start to create more value around that process. Agents could be a heck of a lot more efficient in their day-to-day routines. Technology companies could be a hell of a lot more efficient at the sort of solutions they could build and integrate that into a CRM, go directly from I just got a lead to they actually want to list their property to starting the listing agreement and so forth and so on. So my contention here is that while there's a lot of awesome and wonderful stuff happening in the industry, the nuts and bolts of that, as I've looked at who are some of the players and the providers and who's doing what there's been very little innovation and very little thought that's gone into the place where so much of this stuff starts. And I can't help but think that there's a lot of opportunity for even minor innovations there could have a massive impact on the time and energy that people spend in this space.
And I know that TJ's too young to remember triplicate contracts, but
Actually, I contend that. But before my Redfin days, I was at Northwest Multiple Listing Service for 10 years. And I was actually, when I first started, on that listing input team. So I would get those forms in paper that were faxed and input all of those.
there are still fax numbers at all MLSs.
I'm sorry if that caused a little pain for you, a little shell shock. So you know
TJ,
exactly what I'm talking about.
Oh, 100%, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously a lot of technology, and we haven't seen everything that's under the hood at Redfin, but these must be some of the things that your folks are talking about and thinking about how you can add efficiencies to a formerly paper-driven world, and start integrating some of those services.
Yeah, definitely. We've actually licensed some forms from different organizations around the country to load them into our backend system to start automating that process in as many markets as we can. Getting the access to a lot of those forms digitally is a painful process. I can see the look on Scott's face. He's run into that before.
Very painful process.
It really is. But whenever we're able to do that, it adds so much efficiency to the listing input process and intake process for our agents nationwide that we've been trying to roll that out in as many markets as we can, and it's been really, really successful. But speaking to what you kind of started off talking about, Scott, is getting this entire process digitized, getting it to be auto-filled. I actually helped launch a product at Northwest MLS 4 or 5 years ago, where it was just called Listing Upload, where you would auto-fill your new listing with anything you could from tax records, and that auto-popped all of your forms. You got all those digitally signed via Authentisign, and then bam, you just click submit and it uploads the listing right to Matrix. And what was interesting about that process is they actually brought together the folks that run Authentisign, which was Instinet Solutions back then, and all the folks over at Matrix and CoreLogic together to come up with that new technology. So it was really exciting to be a part of, and I think that we can continue to iterate on that model and make it even better, make it more efficient, and add more products and services and features to it over time.
Yeah, I appreciated it as an agent and as a broker. We enjoyed that tool at Northwest MLS.
I think if you look it up on YouTube, there's still a video of me floating around there, introducing it and trying to get people to use it. So
can you pull that up?
No.
That'd be
Give
awesome.
me 1 second here.
Yeah.
So, but to that point, TJ, there's the where you can do it, right? You said that from a Redfin perspective, right? Where you can do it, it creates amazing efficiencies. And the important part about that, and I think for if you're in one market, if you're in 2 markets, if you're in 3 markets, whatever it is, right? This isn't the end of the world. But when you're in 50, or you're in 120, or you're in 900, all the markets, this is where it gets challenging to create consistency and process consistency, right? And now suddenly you think about the time and energy that goes into that, how do I digitize this? And then the time and energy that goes into the data entry part of things, but then the time and energy that goes into, now I've got to train. In these markets, I can do these things, and in these markets, I can do these things, and I've got to train people differently here and differently here. And then, by the way, you have this annual conference, right? And everybody gets together and talks about, man, it's awesome where I am because everything is digital. And they're like, what do you mean everything's digital, right? Like,
I can't tell you how many times I've heard that. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like that's where like. If we think about our jobs from the perspective of how do we create the best possible experience, it's really difficult to create a great experience when you've got to contend with these things. And to your point earlier, Sam, this isn't about a bitch session, right? This is about these are some of the pain points, and they're not easy problems to solve, but these are not insurmountable problems, right? These are things that we've got a lot of brain power in this group, and where there's a will, there's a way. It's just making these things a priority to help push the entire industry forward.
And I think a lot of these, we're talking about education. At the end of the day, MLSs want to do things in a way that benefit their customers, and brokers want to do that for their agents. A lot of times we just don't have that visibility for the best practices. We haven't yet said this is really the best way to do something, which is why a group like this Pain Points Forum usually focuses partially on the business side, business decisions, business processes. That may be policy, it may be association related. And then on the technical side, which is the actual data. First, we need to be able to get it and use it, but is it the quality of data that we're looking for?
Yeah.
And if not, why? And TJ, why don't I let you dig in on this one first? Maybe talk a little bit about duplication and misuse of certain types of data, et cetera.
Yeah, duplication winds up being a bigger issue for us in specific markets. It's certainly not consistent nationwide, but duplication is something where we might get some listing data coming through the pipeline where the table that we're looking at, it says that the property type might be a condominium, and then the subtable might be the property type reads differently. And those issues come up quite frequently. I think that the examples that I gave were if an MLS had either a type field or a property subtype field with a structure type, often doesn't match up with what the property type is. And there's no real standard around the way that data flows in. So, I mean, I've been working a little bit more with the RESO group recently on the data dictionary work group and a couple others. And I think that as we dive in deeper to a lot of the issues that we run into and haven't really surfaced before, it just gives us more and more opportunities to work with you guys at RESO and work with all of the MLSs that we pull data from to just make it the best that it possibly can.
And it has been great having, obviously, you involved, all of our very intelligent contributors who come in and add. That's the unique licensee ID group that we've been working on, which TJ, you've been a part of. And you can imagine if every data set went out with a unique ID for a property, for their organization, and for the agent, we'd solve so many deduplication issues. It's
if
really
only
getting the work done rather than the concept.
Yeah, that'd be fantastic. I mean, we run a lot of our own processes internally to deduplicate a lot of the data that we get, whether it's listing IDs or agent IDs, office and brokerage IDs. But those always aren't perfect. We do the best that we can with the data that we get, but having a standard level above that or a standardized process for it would even be a step above.
So what are some solutions, Scott? I mean, how do we start working on some things to solve this?
So look, there's a couple, and there are probably even a couple more problem areas, as we all know, right? There's duplication within the data, and then there's duplication across MLSs as well, right? People that take a listing, and you might have 3 MLSs that all kind of coincide with each other and touch. So what happens? People put that same listing in multiple MLSs, and then what do I do? Who wins if I'm trying to present this to the consumer? There's plenty of challenges and issues around that. But let's just, coming back around to, wow, wouldn't it be awesome if we had a common set of IDs for participants, for vendors, for the MLSs themselves, right? We've started to define all of this stuff. And and an ability to tie that to a unique property ID, right? This is the reason that all of that work has gone in so far, and more lately, where I've been seeing this, some of these challenges come to light is when I'm trying to track. Think about this, and I'm sure Redfin has these issues all the time. I'm trying to track consumers to listings, to the agent that's associated with that listing, to what MLS is that listing in, and if I've got the same property that might be in 3 different MLSs with 3 entirely different IDs, how can I then track all of that stuff back depending on where that listing was viewed? How do I track all that back to a unique attribute on let's say a view event on that specific property? Those things happen every day, all the time, and cause a whole lot of issues with the accuracy of analytics and other information that we're trying to deal with. Yeah. So as a starting point, getting some of this stuff implemented and getting, look, we've already come up with the standardization models for unique property for members, for the MLSs and starting on the vendors as well, right? But how far is that implemented? Very inconsistently. I've recommended to a lot of folks to at least start ingesting that information and start pulling in the information, so we at least know, who's the MLS, so we can start attributing, how many vendors out there, by the way, have their own unique ID for every MLS. How many vendors out there have their own, it's mind-boggling that everybody is doing this stuff. So starting point is getting some of the getting the MLS community and vendors to start leveraging the standards that already exist, and then obviously part of this comes down to then what do we do with all that information. And probably something I hope we get to talk about a little bit is integration and interoperability among these things. And I know there's a work group for that, but there's some serious business challenges there. But it's got to start with the consistency of those underlying identifiers. And if we can't get blanket adoption, and that's probably, I'm sorry, but that's one of the easiest things for us to be able to do is at least start implementing these identifiers. And then once I have that, now I can actually start to interrogate the data in a much smarter way and start looking at things like, you said this was a single family residential here, you're saying it's but it's got a condo subtype here. This can't possibly be. It's got to resolve back to this property, and at least now we can start to say, no, this property is what we say it is, and we know what it's not based on what it is.
Right.
We're not doing those things now. We're not going to figure out all the machine learning algorithms and all the other wonderful stuff that people are going to throw at this, but for those algorithms and for all that intelligence and everything else to work, it's got to start with some clean level of understanding of those kind of lower level IDs. And to me, that's the single most important part for us to get to.
Yeah, it's a really, really straightforward foundational item that we need to work on. I think a lot of what the two of you have been discussing is something we talked about with Dan Troop from Remax and Bill Fowler from Compass earlier in the week, which is really going back and doing strat planning, doing business planning, and reimagining what our processes would look like if we hadn't started as 1,200 different silos building their own software.
Yeah.
And that's, not being stuck with the traditional labels, the traditional processes, traditional committee structures, the way we give data access to folks. So this pain points group is actually where we started the process and the concept of building out what's been called TSA pre-check for data, but is really just a more informative process for MLSs to be able to understand what their data partners' education and experience look like. So we started the real estate, working with real estate data course, which we're working on this week at the conference. And that's just to allow new entrants to understand the process that we use and not just, build a tool in the garage and break everything at the MLS. But also for them, for incumbents to be able to say, we do know this, we've done this before. And there's also been a concept recently of being able to show who has had these data relationships in the past. For MLSs to be able to say, these are the 200 vendors that we've had data contracts with, obviously not exposing anything the MLS doesn't want to. This is totally voluntary, but being able to do that across multiple MLSs so that if they get a new data access application, they can look it up and say, well, my partner over on this side of the state's actually worked with this vendor already. Let's go talk to them, see what kind of information we can get. Or maybe Scott Petronis' consulting company has already worked with 300 different MLSs. We might put them on a fast track if that's what our internal process is, because we know that they understand the data access process. So, us being an organization that wants to promote competition, we would never want to do something like this that would inhibit new incumbents, the exact opposite, that would promote incumbents over newcomers to the industry. But it would simply provide information, and it may be valuable to folks. So I know I've heard this from vendors and technical brokers a lot. Have you heard, a need for this kind of thing, TJ? And I know you had some things you wanted to talk about in terms of data access as well.
I think I've often voiced a need for something like this personally. Running expansion at Redfin, I think I've launched 24 or 25 markets over the last few years, which are MLSs. And, the experience that you get from MLS to MLS varies wildly, from rules and regulations to the amount of information that's even available about the data feed, like a data mapping documentation or anything else like that. We try to gather as much just information about the platform that we can get before we start building out a new data feed. So standardization around that, where you can have a vendor like, okay, this vendor, it knows exactly what this data looks like, whether it's a web API or whether it's RETS or some other format. They've worked with this before X number of times, and we can give them this information and they can just take it and run, versus a new incumbent like you were talking about that might need a little bit more of a walkthrough, which is totally great. But right now, I don't think I'm experiencing much of either, really. I think as much of a walkthrough as I can get from any MLS would be fantastic. Some we get a little bit more support than others. It really varies on who we're talking to and what their experience level is as well. So maybe we even need to consider, going MLS by MLS and seeing what kind of experience they have with providing the information and what resources they have available to supply or to run this type of a program, to give that information out to new vendors.
Yeah, Scott, you've seen what an organization like MLS Grid has done in terms of data licensing, of bringing a lot of MLSs together and getting things as close and as standardized as possible. Do you think there's more opportunities for that on a large scale for not just data licensing, but data access processes?
Yeah, yeah, and boy, we could talk for hours about this topic
We'll get
alone,
to
right?
after this a little bit more, so that's okay.
So I mean, honestly, that's what got me into this industry to begin with. Was when my first gig was trying to create a single unified API for the real estate industry. Small little opportunity there. And so is there opportunity? Absolutely. The fact is, we still have hundreds of companies all trying to deliver practically the same thing. And please don't get me wrong, right? What I'm not saying is all of your data is identical. What I am saying is you're all trying to provide the same thing to a set of vendors, right? You're trying to provide convenient access to information so that they can, on behalf of your participants, deliver solutions, right? I mean, at the end of the day, that's what it boils down to. And you don't need to deliver that in 400 different flavors. You don't need to deliver that in multitudes of ways. It's a pretty straightforward set of things that most, and when we're talking about for the most part, right, it's developers, right? It's software developers that are trying to access this stuff in order to use it for a variety of means, whether that's to load into databases, whether that's to create user interfaces, whether that's to create input tools, whatever it might be. But there's a pretty finite set of use cases for this stuff, and it is a wide swath of differentiation across the country of not only the experience you get, but the capabilities that they have, the knowledge base that they have, the licensing model that they have, the you name it, which makes me think, again, coming back to some of the ideas of how do you deal with some of this stuff. I'm going to say, with the what's it called, Sam? The unique identifier, the MLS and kind of vendor.
The OUID.
The OUID, right? So, you think about the OU, which is amazing, right? And just having that and keeping that up to date and knowing who's who and having a unique identifier that I can attach to stuff is fantastic. On top of that, though, now I think about, like, as a brokerage, TJ, when you're going into a new market or you're looking at markets to go into, wouldn't it be awesome if you knew and you could hit something as either a single API or every MLS could send you back here's here's our metadata, right? We offer an API that's been certified platinum. We offer, data dictionary version, blah, 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 right?
Mm-hmm.
We have, here's our pricing model. Here's where our license agreement is. Here's our compliance statement.
It's all the fields that don't fit within the data dictionary.
Yeah. And a way to just, for every single MLS, to just advertise their capabilities. And, wouldn't that be amazing to know that? I've had teams of people that I just literally have to go through and collect all that stuff and manage it on like, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars in salaries every year, and probably millions and millions of dollars in salaries every year, by the way, that of people that are just dealing with the minutia of that information that could be, you know, standardized in a way where we at least create a profile that says, here's what we need you to fill in. You know, how do you price? What's your license? Where are your terms? Where do I get the agreement? Who do I contact? Those sorts of things. That would be absolutely spectacular for anybody that's trying to do business. And likewise, you know, thinking about the vendors in the industry, wow, wouldn't it be amazing if there was a registry of all the vendors, and here are the MLSs that they've actually worked with, that they're pulling data from, that they have experience with. They know how to work with RETs, they know how to work with the web API, they work with data dictionary, they've been certified on the client side. Now, and look, the great thing is RESO's in the position with a lot of this information and data, but we haven't necessarily gone down the path of standardizing how do we represent all of that stuff. I bet there's a bunch of folks, you know, myself included, that have a vested interest in wanting to be able to get to that information, who'd love to roll up their sleeves to figure out how do we get there. That would be an amazing exercise.
Yeah, that's exactly what we're here for now, because this is the part where we move over to our live webinar and let everybody ask questions of you as our two panelists leading that, which should be great. We've gotten a lot of work done in the past in these sessions, even if we don't solve the problems, sort of just describing exactly what they are and making sure we record all those little parts of that may be the parts of the solution. So we're going to move on to that just a little bit here. I do want to thank Scott and TJ. Fantastic conversation. We appreciate having you here.
It's been awesome.
Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
All right, folks, hang on. We're about to go live.
Looking forward to taking questions.